First of all, I want to play a game with y'all. I lived in Kentucky for 3 years, so I can say y'all. It's appropriate. So this is a game, a children's game, that is one of just a couple of games that's played in like every country in the world. It goes by some different names in different countries, but I know when I was a kid, I learned it as red light, green light, 1, 2, 3. Anybody know that game? Yeah, okay. Well, I need a couple of helpers. I know he's really busy with his studies and everything, but I wondered if Noah could help. Do you want to play a game with me? Sure. Just stay right there by your mom, okay? Right there. And I need another child to play the game. Normally the child is played by my husband, who is like a 4-year-old, but I'm not going to ask him to do that. Chris, would you play a game with us? Okay, would you get back there by Aaron? All right. So now, Aaron, do you know red light, green light, 1, 2, 3? Noah, sorry, where did Aaron come from? I have no idea. Okay, but Aaron should be here. Do you know how to play red light, green light, 1, 2, 3? Can anybody, did Chris know how to play? What an impoverished childhood. Did you play games, Chris? Nothing, okay. Okay, well, the object of the game is for you to get to it, and I'll play it, okay? But you can only move after I say red light, green light, 1, 2, 3. Right? No, it goes the other way. Okay. When I say red light, you have to stop and you freeze. Huh? I know, right? See? All right. So, and when I say red light, you have to freeze in whatever position you're in. Okay? Right. And you have to go all the way back to the start. Okay? So I'm going to turn around. So red light, green light. You can start running. 1, 2, 3, stop. This is really cool because I can actually watch you and scream. I've never played it that way before. I like it. Okay. Ready? Red light, green light. 1, 2, 3, stop. Wow, very good. His eyes are so intense. Very intense. Red light, green light, green light, green. 1, 2, 3. Now what you're going to have permission to do is you can look around. You can move your head and see, are there anybody else? Is anybody going to fall into you? Are you going to fall over? Is there anybody else around? Are you getting closer? Red light, green light, 1, 2, 3. Very good, very good. Thank you. All right, good job. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Well, there's like a couple of cool things about that game, and especially the kind of the funnest part of the game. Funnest, is that a word? The funnest part of that game is the stopping, right? Because you kind of freeze. What's really fun if you have a whole group, I should have made you all play, a whole group where you all kind of freeze and somebody's teetering and somebody's falling over and somebody leans on somebody else and we kind of have a domino thing and all of that. And on that freeze, everything stops. And you become really aware of what else is going on and who else is there and how close you are or how far you are or what the person is doing or saying. And it's that shocking stop that we want to talk about today. What was the scripture passage from Luke that we heard today? What is that generally called? I love you and thank you, but did you hear Luke's introduction? Where was he? On a level place. This is Luke's version of Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. And what do you remember from the Sermon on the Mount, though? What did you expect these things to say? Who are we missing? What about the poor in spirit? What about the peacemakers, because they get to be called children of God? What about those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they get to be filled? We like Matthew's version. Matthew's version is so spiritualized. It's so nice, and we can just want to be at peace with one another and we get to be God's kids. We can just want to have righteousness in the world and we get what we're looking for. We just have a spirit that is humble. And we're blessed by God. All due respect to Matthew and Matthew's gospel. But that's the one we like. But Luke shocks us. In Luke's remembrance of this event, and Jesus could have repeated the sermon a little bit differently for a little bit different audience. That's not improbable. So in Luke's version, though, what about this one? This one is different. This one is just punchy. It's just the poor are blessed. The hungry are blessed. The impoverished are blessed. The marginalized and neglected and hated are blessed by God. And then it also had the other side of the scale. Did you hear that? The woes. If you're full and fed, woe to you. If you're rich and satisfied, woe to you. If everybody likes you, woe to you. Let's just tear this one out. I don't like Luke's Sermon on the Plain. And neither did a lot of other people. Some people really gravitated toward it by the thousands and heard a new message. Oh, we thought if we didn't have jobs, if we didn't have money, if we didn't have enough food, we were cursed. We thought if people didn't like us and we weren't able to get jobs and positions and power and we were shunned by the world, then eternity in heaven had cursed us also. We thought that's the way it meets out. But this is a jarring, different. Wait a minute. Let's stop and think about this message. Where did Jesus get this message from? I want to back up in Luke's gospel, in where Jesus was just before this happened. Just before this happened, Luke announces that Jesus chooses the 12 disciples, specifically certain people who are going to spend the next 36 months with him, traveling around, learning, sleeping outside, looking for food, experiencing the power and the grace of God. But right before that, Jesus had spent all night on the mountain praying. And I think if we look at the whole context of this, because where does this striking message come from? This boldness to proclaim that all of those that everybody thought were nothing were actually the real something. Where does this teaching? And this teaching Jesus gave to the disciples. I think it came from that night. That whole night Jesus spent in prayer. Anybody participate in a prayer vigil? I have at different times, and it's really been years since I remember my church when I was growing up. I think for World Day of Prayer, or maybe some other thing, we would have a vigil, a 24-hour, some cataclysmic event. We would have a 24-hour vigil in the church, and people would take like half hours or hours and sit. There would be some candles and inspiration and maybe music, maybe silence. But except for maybe a hospital room, I don't know that I've spent the whole night in prayer. And yet maybe this visage of the hospital room is a good metaphor for that kind of praying. Jesus spent the whole night. I doubt he got himself hoarse, talking in prayer all night long. I imagine Jesus spent a bunch of time just listening. You know, what it is to go out into nature, into the wilderness, into the woods, by the stream, in a clearing, stars overhead, powerfully brilliant, and just listening to the sounds of creation and the Creator, and just breathing. We probably fell asleep a little bit too, but just imagining what the future would hold and what his place in it was, and just taking that breath. When we are confronted with the challenges of the world that is around us, when we are confronted with people who are poor and living in poverty, when we meet someone who is unable to take a shower, to get new clothes, to get dental care, to get good food, how do we viscerally react? I think one of the coolest things, and I heard about it long before I came to this church, was when you were able to start hosting Captain, and you did what my congregation at the time wanted to do but couldn't figure out how, and you installed a shower in the building, and you installed laundry facilities in the building. And quite honestly, I was envious. I thought how wonderful, how important that is when you don't have any money and you don't have a place to live, and you even want to just get a job so you can no longer be in that situation, but you know that you're rumpled. Well, you're dirty, you're not rumpled. And you probably smell, and you, how do you present yourself so you can get out of where you are? And the only way is to be clean and well pressed and well fed. And that you did that. I just, glory to God. And I understand it was a gift and all the rest of it, but lots of people get gifts and lots of people say, not in my backyard, thank you so very much. So to be confronted by the poor, to be confronted by the hungry, to be confronted by those who are rejected and learn how to deal with it is an amazing accomplishment. Many of the people who heard Jesus' words didn't want to do that. They recoiled from those people and from these words and wanted no part of them. But Jesus and the disciples were working on a lifestyle and a culture that was able to accept the people who are poor, the people who are hungry, the people who are smelling, the people who speak without great education, the people who are shunned by others. How do we get to that point? Because I don't know about you and me, but sometimes I'm in a situation, I brush up against someone, I see somebody in the store, on the street. Every time we drive out of our house in Colony and come to any major intersection that's within a half a mile from us, there's folks with signs telling us that they're poor or they're veterans or they're hungry or they're homeless. And I admit, I tense up. Thousands of thoughts go through my head. Are they really? Is it a scam? If I roll down the window, what will happen? Who are they? Should I, with my other job, get them connected to social services? Why aren't they in a shelter? Should I help them? Who are they? But thankfully for me, red light, green light, 1, 2, 3, the light changes, I go on. How do we deal with the reality that according to Jesus, these people are God's favorites? Those who are poor are God's favorites. Those who are hungry are God's favorites. Those who are shunned are God's favorites. Those who are ridiculed and met with prejudice and racism are God's favorites. Those who are comfortable, those who are fed, those who are employed, those who are top of the heap receive a woe. And that's not a woe, that's a woe unto you woe. How do we deal with that? That's troubling. I've been reading in a book about the work of racial justice, healing ourselves and our communities, and transforming our communities through mindfulness by Rhonda McGee. In one of the chapters, Rhonda speaks about 4 things that we can do. And today I just want to talk about 2 of them. She puts them in an acronym of RAIN. And so I kind of want to talk about what to do on a rainy day. or a snow day right now. It's rainy days. But do you ever have one of those snow days or rainy days when if you don't have to go to work or you don't have to plow or you don't have to shovel, but it's just everything stops and all the stuff you thought you were going to do, you're not going to do, and you just stop. And maybe that's the day you sit home and make soup. Or maybe that's the day you sit home and curl up with a book. Or maybe that's the day you just kind of do something you never had time to do before. Well, the first thing in her reign is recognize for the R. You need to take time and recognize the situation you're in. And that, like the children's game, when we stop and we recognize where we are. So sometimes when I'm at that street corner, or where I'm standing in line in the grocery aisle, or when I'm confronted with a news piece, or meet someone of a different color, a different culture, a different language, sometimes before I engage a reaction, especially if maybe I perceive they've given me attitude, or I'm wondering if I'm giving attitude, I need to just stop. And the best thing about stopping is breathing. Mindfulness, a practice by so many faith traditions and so many spiritual traditions to be aware of what's going on instead of just reacting and moving forward. I think that night before this sermon, Jesus was very mindful of all the people in his community, all the people in his country, all the people in his congregation, all the members of his disciples, all the folks who were ruling the empire, and he was aware. And he took time all night long to breathe. A few months ago, I introduced a spiritual practice of breathing prayer. And I want to stay with that 4 count. And I will invite you, now if there's for some reason why you can't hold your breath or you can't breathe this way, please don't do that. Just keep on breathing normally and take care of yourself on all things. But I invite you, if you can and if you will, to breathe with me and to pray with me. So whatever you need to do, I don't care whether your eyes are open and looking at me or not, or whether they're closed, or whatever gets you in a place. But I just want you to breathe. And there's 4 patterns to this breath, and there's 4 counts to each of them. So for the first thing, I'm going to invite you for a count of 4 to breathe in. And for the next count of 4, I'm going to ask you to just hold your breath, if that's okay for you. And the next count of 4, I'm going to ask you to slowly exhale while we count to 4. And the last count of 4, just breathe however you need to breathe. Okay? So if you're willing, let's just breathe in, and I'll kind of breathe and count. So let's go in for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4. And relax. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to try and take it a little slower this time. We're going to do it 3 more times. Ready? Breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. Relax. Again, breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. Relax. One last time, wherever your mind goes, breathe in. Hold for 4. 1. Breathe out. And relax. What did you think about? Yes?
I thought about missing the horses on YouTube. Remember the horses species?
Wow. Okay.
And I missed them this morning.
Yes, I didn't see they were now. All I really could think about was counting and breathing. And that's kind of the point. Horses? Sometimes I prep him in the morning for the sermon, sometimes I don't. If we pay attention to our breath and where we are, it grounds us and stops. And I've been working on that from time to time for the last several months. Sometimes it's at the stop signs. Sometimes it's just at home in the morning, or sometimes it's in the middle of the day. I just stop, and I keep breathing all the time, but I just stop and pay attention to my breath. And am aware that I am alive. I am blessed. I am here, and I'm okay. And in that first step of RAIN that McGee has of recognizing, is recognizing those things. I think Jesus that night, and then in the next day in the sermon, recognized that God is present in all those places. And from that solid foundation was able to move forward. So as we go out into the world and we face, or we are, people who are hungry, people who are impoverished, people who are lonely, people who are shunned. And that might be us, or it might be somebody else. If we have developed this practice of being aware, of breathing, just stopping and taking a breath, we can be centered more in that place where we know that we are blessed by God and they are blessed by God. And then we can take the next move. Because I think that's part of the challenge right now, culturally and nationally, is we're not taking a breath. We're just reacting. We're hearing the news, we're meeting somebody, they disagree with us, and we react. We hear some new thing, we wonder there's a problem, and we just react. We also armchair kind of react and say, well, this is the way to solve that problem. But we aren't centered. I think before Jesus could go out into this amazing ministry, before the disciples go along with him, before they could deal with the problems of poverty and hunger and racism in their own day, they had to breathe and know who they were and whose they were. So I'm challenging us as centuries later followers of this same Christ to get centered, to take time to breathe, and maybe start a habit of meditation or a habit of breathing prayer. We can all count to 4. We can all count our breath and just spend some time letting all the other things go and letting them go into God's hands. And then accept that the person next to you may be very hurt, or may be very offended, or may have been very abused, or may have been very neglected, or maybe is really, really hungry, or maybe is in desperate need of employment, or a shower, or whatever, and that's what's true. And that is. So the second part of RAIN is acceptance. This is just like, it is what it is. People, and Jesus in another part of the gospel says, you will always have the poor with you. There are poor. There are people living in poverty. It's just true. It does not make us less of a nation or less of a people. It is part of the human existence. But if we are centered and find in us a strength, a peace, a moment to stop thinking and just hold, we can move forward into a world that is filled with great blessings and great grace, and is filled with great challenge and great pain. But if we are not in a center point, we are just whipped and whirled around, or just bent on reacting, running on adrenaline, and either in anger or in giving up our hands, that there's no hope. Because Paul to the Corinthians was saying, we believe in a miracle. We believe in God working in the world. We believe in resurrection. We believe in hope. So I think you and I are called to breathe and stop for a moment and be in that moment of knowing that God's blessing is here. God calls us to live in a world that is filled with blessings and woes. and just stop. I invite you to come back next week because we're going to talk about the I and the N of rain and talk about investigating and talk about not letting it stay that way. But that's for next week in the Transfiguration. But I think our first lesson, and for us to just practice this week, let's practice breathing. Let's just breathe in the center of God's grace. And in a world that's filled with blessings and woes, and it is, but we also believe it's filled with God. Thanks be to God, and amen.